Praise the Lord. Welcome to the Bible analysis class. We are discussing and traveling through the book of Genesis. As you know, the first book, Genesis, written by Moses, for the convenience of study, was divided into two in the last class. There is a total of 50 chapters. The first 11 chapters cover the history of human beings, covering a period of 2000 years. And chapters 12 to 50, 39 chapters, cover the biography of four great men: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. In the last class, we have studied the first part, where we have gone through the history covering four major events: creation, the fall of man, the judgment in flood, and the Tower of Babel. And also we have seen four people there: Adam, Abel, Enoch, and Noah. Now, in continuation of that, we will enter into the second part in this class. Before we begin the class, we have to remember one thing. One of the ways in which God is narrating the book, of the 50 chapters, only 11 chapters are used for explaining history of 2000 years, whereas 39 chapters are devoted for describing about four people, which simply means that God is more interested in people transforming their lives, using them rather than making history. So we must be very careful to listen to the word of God and get our lives transformed. Now, with this in introduction, let us get into the second part, that is biography of four major patriarchal fathers: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now, while we have studied the first part, we have seen about the wickedness of man and the judgment of God. The judgment came in the form of flood, as well as the Tower of Babel, where the languages were put into confusion and people were not able to communicate each others. Now, in spite of this judgment, God wanted to show His grace to people. And for showing His grace, see, in the first part, God was dealing with only individuals. I told you about, people like Abel, Enoch, Noah. Those people found grace. But during the second part of Genesis, what we see is that God decided to choose a people for Him. They are known as the chosen people of God. And as you proceed in the Old Testament, we come across several history books, and all these history books are not the history of human beings. It is a history of the chosen people of God, who are known as Israelites. Now, why God decided to choose a group of people or a nation? There are several reasons. The most important reasons can be elaborated in the following way. First of all, God wanted to entrust the Holy Scriptures, or the laws and regulations about man and how he should live, Holy Scriptures. Then secondly, God wanted these people to live according to the Scriptures that God revealed to them. In the first class, we have already stated that Bible is the revealed will of God. So God wanted to reveal the will and give it in writing, which is known as Holy Scriptures, to a group of people. And God expected them to live accordingly, or God wanted them to be witnesses in this world. And also, God gave the promise that the seed of woman will come as a redeemer, and that redeemer should come through some group of people, some family, some generation, So for these three reasons, God chose a group of people known as chosen people. I hope you got the points, or the reasons why a group of people was chosen by God to entrust the Holy Scriptures, to be witnesses in this world, and for the promised Messiah to come through them. Now, this process was started by God by choosing a man and calling him and separating him. And this man is known as Abraham, and later his name was changed into Abraham. Now, God would make him father of a mighty nation. Now, this promise is seen in chapter 12 of Genesis, and is again repeated in New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11, 8 and 9. Now, if you go to Genesis chapter 12, the first few verses, in the second and third verse, God told Abraham, I will bless you, you will be a blessing, and all nations of the earth will be blessed through you. All nations of the world. So that was God's plan in choosing this man, to bless all the nations of the world through this particular man. The beginnings of history of the chosen people, Israel, is like this. God made a covenant with Abraham later. We can see that in chapter 15 of Genesis. And his grandson, Jacob, despite his shortcomings, faults, and mistakes, valued God's covenant blessings, and he was enthusiastic about God's plan of founding a nation by which the whole world would be blessed. And that is the reason why God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. And this name is the name by which God's chosen people are later known. Israel, Israelites. So this is the way in which the chosen people were brought into light. Now the 12 sons of Jacob had 12 sons. These 12 sons became the heads of 12 tribes of Israel. And when his beloved son Joseph became the ruler of Egypt, his brothers and their families and his father Jacob went down to Egypt. The whole descendants amounted to a total of 70 people. So 70 people, the family members of Joseph, went down into Egypt at a later stage. And you can read all these things in the book of Genesis. I'm not going to all the details. The whole descendants amounted to a total of 70 people. Later, they multiplied and they became a great multitude. And after the death of Joseph, they became slaves in Egypt. The book of Genesis ends with the death of Joseph. I've already told you that it begins with beginnings and it ends in a coffin. So, following the death of Joseph, he was placed in a coffin. That is the closing of the book of Genesis. Joseph actually died at the age of 110. It is written in the last verse of Genesis, chapter 50 and 26. He spent more than, 90 years in Egypt. To be very precise, 93 years. But one of the specific things that we have to note about Joseph is that he did not get naturalized as an Egyptian. Though he spent most of his life in Egypt, and though he was the ruler of Egypt, he did not become an Egyptian, or he did not get naturalized as an Egyptian. He remained part of the chosen people of God, and he died with the hope that God will deliver them and take them to a promised land, the land that was promised to Abraham, the father of the chosen people. And he instructed his people that when God delivers them, they should carry up his bonds from Egypt when they will be delivered from Egypt. Now this is seen in the last part of the book of Genesis, chapter 50. If you read 24 through 26, these details can be seen. Now why I am emphasizing this particular part is because there is spiritual meaning and there is spiritual understanding that we have to get about what was done by Joseph. Now the most important thing that we have to remember is that we people, or we real believers, Christians, are only pilgrims and strangers, and we are not supposed to become part and parcel of the world. We are called out people, separate people. So we are here pilgrims and strangers. That is why Joseph remained as a pilgrim, as a stranger, though he spent his life there and though he was the ruler of that particular country. And our real citizenship is in heaven. Our real citizenship is not on earth. We are not citizens of this world, though we live here, but our citizenship is in heaven. We can read that in Colossians and in the New Testament books. So Joseph reminds us all these things, and one day Christ will come and he will deliver us from this evil world, and he will transform us, and we will be caught up with him in the upper air to be with him forever. Now Joseph had this vision and that's why he didn't become an Egyptian, but he remained apart, and he instructed that his bones must be carried once God delivers them from this country, Egypt. Now, this is in brief the second part of Genesis, putting it very brief, now, the rest of the time of this class, we can go through some general specialities of the book, which will be enlightening. So, now we have actually completed the content of the book, but what we have to learn from this book, I am going to give now. Now, the main message of the book, Genesis, what is the main message of the book, Genesis? It actually tells us about the failure of man under every condition. God provided different types of conditions for man, and in every condition, man failed. But God did not leave man who was a sinner, who was failing constantly, who was falling constantly, but God met that situation by the salvation of God through His grace. We see a graceful God giving salvation to man in spite of his sin, in spite of his fall, etc. Or wherever sin abounded, grace did abound much more. Sin abounded as people multiplied, and grace of God also abounded. Now, if you go through Genesis, we can see several instances when the people were judged by God out of His anger because they were constantly sinning. Like they were judged in the Garden of Eden, they were judged during the time of Noah in the flood, they were again judged at the Tower of Babel, etc. But in all these places, He was very graceful. He provided a way of salvation. So, judgment and grace comes together. When sin abounded, God's grace also abounded, and God wanted His salvation to be given to the people, and He wanted to send a Redeemer so that people can be redeemed out of this sin and they can lead a sinless life. Now, these things are elaborated in the book if you go in detail. And another speciality of the book of Genesis in general is that as you read the book, you cannot skip pairs in Genesis. There are a lot of pairs or two people coming together. Why pairs? Because that shows two lines of people developing. One line going with God and the other line going with Satan. Sin, Satan. Or one line going with God and ending up in heaven in eternal life, and the other line going with Satan and sin and ending up in eternal hellfire. So, these two lines are developing, and that's what I call pairs, So, I'll just introduce the names of the pairs, and you can go to the details reading through the book. Now, Adam and Eve, the first pair. Abel and Cain is next pair. Noah and his contemporaries is the next one. Abraham and Lot is the next pair. Isaac and Ishmael, another pair. Jacob and Esau, another pair. Then Joseph and his brethren, yet another pair. Now, if you remember these names, Abel went with God, Cain went with sin, and Noah found grace and was with God, and he did everything that God commanded him, but the contemporaries were not willing to follow God, and they were judged, So, two pairs. Abraham and Lot. Abraham followed God. He was the father of the faithful, but Lot was not like that. He was a worldly man. Isaac and Ishmael. Jacob and Esau. In all these people we can see. Also, pairs of people are there, and as you go through the book of Genesis, you must get hold of these pairs, and once we come to the end of the Bible, the book of Revelation, we see these two lines coming and ending up in either eternal life with God or eternal damnation in hellfire with Satan. So, this is that's why I told you in the beginning that Genesis is the seed plot of the whole Bible. So, here we can see the thinking of Bible by knowing these pairs, Now, another thing that I would like to bring to your attention is some great beginnings with God. This book is the book of beginnings, but we have to note certain beginnings and how it progresses. First of all, Adam began with God and fell through disobedience. We see that in chapter 3. He began with God. Everything was started with God, and Adam was with God at the beginning. But as things progressed, he fell through disobedience. So what we have to learn is that we have to start with God and we have to complete with God. Don't do disobedience and don't get, falling away from God. Another person is Abel. He began with God by the blood of sacrifice. We see that in chapter 4, especially 4 and 4. He began with God by the blood of sacrifice and he continued. He was respected by God and he was able to please God. That's a good example for us to follow. Another example is Noah. Noah began with God by the way of the ark. Chapter 6 and 7, 8, 9, these chapters elaborate his life. He began with God by the way of the ark and he got saved. It's a good example for us to follow. The ark is the symbol of Jesus Christ and salvation. So we can travel with Noah and get into the ark and get saved. A fourth person we have to take note is Abraham, who began with God and he built continuously altars wherever he went to call upon the name of the Lord. So we can also emulate, follow or imitate Abraham, began with God and continued worshipping him. So wherever he went, he built an altar. We can see that in chapter 12, especially 12 and 8. Now these are all new beginnings which we can follow, which we can imitate. And again, I would like to bring to your attention some great names and messages, 7 of them. From again, these names will get repeated, but we have to learn certain things from these names, because I told you at the beginning of the class that God is not interested in making history, but He is interested in people and how people moved with God or how people disobeyed God and how people were transformed by God. These things are the most important thing that we have to learn from Genesis, because 39 chapters are devoted for describing the biographical activities of 4 people. That shows the interest of God, So I am again highlighting some personalities from the book of Genesis, especially 7 of them. 7, of course, is the number of completeness. So these 7 names you must remember. First of all, we must meet Abel. I have already told you about him. Let us bow with Abel at the cross of the slain lamb. Always bow and worship with him at the cross of the slain lamb, because he offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice. That's what we read in the Bible. All people sacrifice things, but his sacrifice was a more excellent sacrifice. A more excellent sacrifice was offered by him, because his sacrifice was through the slain lamb on the cross. He got a view about it and he was able to move with God. And the Lord had respect unto Abel, and his offering is what we read in the chapter 4 and 4 of Genesis. And God was well pleased with Abel and his offering. God was well pleased with Abel, and also God respected Abel. God respecting Abel, can you think about that? That's something great, isn't it? So we need to learn from Abel. Let's go forward and let us meet another person, Enoch. Let us catch step with Enoch and walk with God. Enoch showed us how we can walk with God. In an age when people were not walking with God, but walking with their, interests, this man rejected all those things and he found time and he walked all his life with God. So let us catch steps with this man, Enoch, and learn to walk with God. God was pleased with him, and he was translated. And because he was translated, he was not seen by anyone. But the most important thing, he did not, or he should not see death. That was God's decision. You read Hebrews chapter 11 and 5, it says that he should not see death. He was not found by anyone. Why? Because he was translated and he went with God, walking and walking and walking and going with God. Good example to follow. And let us go forward. We see another person, Noah. We must believe God and launch out with Noah as God, on God's waters. God will send waters of judgment many a time. But if you catch steps with, Noah and launch out in faith with him, then we can walk on waters. And that's why probably Jesus once walked on water and showed us you can also walk on waters. So from Noah, we have to learn that we can walk over the judgment waters of God. And this was done by Noah because he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Chapter 6 and 8, it clearly tells that he found grace from God. He was a just man and he was perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. Chapter 6, 8 and 9 tells us this, and he overcame the judgment of God. So if you follow Noah, you will found out how to become a just person, how to become perfect, and how you can walk with God and overcome the judgments that come from God. Let's go forward. Another person we have to meet in Genesis is Abraham. Let us meet Abraham and go forth with Abraham in faith, because he is known as a father of the faithful and a friend of God. He became a friend of God and the father of the faithful because he was willing to step out in faith and go to a place which God would show him. He did not see anything, but God told him that, come, I'll take you to a place which I will show you later. Now, because he believed God, he received blessings and promises from God. He believed God, obeyed God, and went out with God. Not just believing God, but he obeyed. And actually, believing or faith is obeying in spite of consequences, There were consequences. In spite of consequences, he obeyed God and he went out with God. And his biography can be written. I have briefly told his biography a few minutes ago, but his biography can be written with 3 words, found in chapter 12, 8 and 9. 3 words, his biography in 3 words. Genesis chapter 12, 8 and 9. It reads like this: pitching a tent for him to stay, building an altar to call upon the name of the Lord, journeying, going on till he reached the promised land. So what are the 3 words? Tent, altar, journeying. Tent. Why tent? Pitching a tent for him to stay. He always lived in a tent, telling us that I'm a pilgrim, I'm a stranger, I'm not staying here permanently, I'm just a passing through. Tent. Now, wherever he went, he built an altar. Why an altar? To call upon the name of the Lord and worship God. And he continued his journey because he was called out for a journey to go to a promised land. We are also on a journey. We are called out by God, called out from the world, and we have to continue this journey till we reach the promised land. So Abraham's history can be reiterated by these words, tent, altar, and journey. And his testimony is seen in chapter 21 and 22. His testimony given by not him, but the people of the land. That again is another thing that we have to note. We often give our testimonies, but testimony should come from people who see you. Now, people who saw Abraham testified in 21 and 22, God is with you. God is with you in all that you do. God is with you. We have seen that God is with you in all that you do. Will people say like that about you and me when we live in this world? People around him told a testimony that Abraham, we understand that God is with you in everything that you do. Oh, that's a great testimony. Now let's go forward. We meet Isaac later. When we meet Isaac, let us dig wells with Isaac and get down to divine resources. Digging wells and going down into divine resources. So Isaac teaches us that we must dig wells and go down to divine resources. Isaac was the only begotten, beloved son of Abraham. He was very humble. He was meek. He was submitted to God. He was obedient. And the beautiful story of he going and finding out a bride is given in the 24th chapter, which is a picture of, Christ finding out a church. So please go through chapter 24, how he found out a beautiful bride. Again, his biography can be written in 3 words like his father Abraham. You take chapter 26 and 25, 3 words: tent, altar, wells. Pitching tent for him to stay, building altars to call upon the name of the Lord, and digging wells to bless people around him. So, similar to Abraham. Abraham's testimony, biography, you remember? Tent, altar, and journeying. Isaac's biography, tent, altar, and wells. He pitched tent for him to stay. He was building altars to call upon the name of the Lord, and digging wells to bless people around him. 26 and 28, chapter 26 and 28 gives the testimony of Isaac, just like his father. His father's testimony we have seen from 21-22. Now 26-28 gives the testimony of Isaac. This testimony again is not testimony that he testified in the church or somewhere. This is a testimony which people told about him. The people around him, they said, we saw certainly that the Lord was with you. We have seen for certain that the Lord is with you and the Lord is walking with you. So wherever you dig a well, you will be finding water. But when we dig wells, we don't get any water because God is not with us. We see that you are a different person, God is with you. So people were very definite, very certain that God was walking with Isaac. So this kind of testimony we must learn from Abraham and Isaac. When people see us, they must testify that this is a man of God. God is working with him and God is blessing this person because he is walking with God. Let's go forward. The sixth person that I would like to introduce is Jacob. If you meet Jacob, we can climb ladders with Jacob and we can see God. That's what's special about Jacob, He was climbing ladders, probably in his dream, and he was able to climb the ladder and he was able to see God. His name was changed to Israel, as mentioned earlier. He was, to begin with, a selfish person, a willful person, very faulty, and a supplanter. But God molded him into a beautiful character. So that also gives us hope, We are all selfish, we are all willful, faulty, we are supplanters, but God has a plan about each one of you, about me. God would like to mold our character into something very beautiful, something very attractive, something God can use, So Abraham illustrates God's faithfulness, while Jacob illustrates God's election and grace. Get to know these words. Abraham illustrates God's faithfulness, but Jacob illustrates election and grace. He was elected by God and God's grace met or transformed Jacob. Now the last person about whom I would like to mention in this class is the seventh one, Joseph. Joseph, when we come to Joseph, let us be true like Joseph and live with God. Very true. No falsehood in Joseph, His life illustrates how to grow from suffering to glory. How to grow from suffering to glory. One of the most beautiful characters in the Bible is Joseph, because nothing wrong about him is mentioned in the Bible. He is a type of Jesus Christ, and we can imitate, we can follow him in the midst of sin and unholy activities. He lived in the midst of sin and several unholy activities. He lived fearing God and proving you can live a holy life in a perverted generation. Very often people say that because this generation is perverted, we are not able to lead a pure life. But Joseph is the proof to show that in a perverted situation, in a crooked society, you can live, you can lead a pure life, a life committed to God. Now, what was the secret of his success? Chapter 39, verses 2, 3 and 21. Please go through chapter 39, second verse, third verse and 21st verse. It clearly tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. Joseph was with the Lord and the Lord was with Joseph. Both of them agreed. Without two people agreeing, they cannot walk together. So these two people agreed. Joseph was with God and God was with him. Chapter 42 and 18 of Genesis tells us another important thing. In the midst of all these things and the challenges that he faced, he said, I fear God. I fear God. Now you think about Joseph. There was no Bible. There was no Bible class. There was no church to go. and there was nobody to encourage him. He was in very difficult, challenging situations, but he states, I fear God. A good testimony, One of the problems with us is that we don't fear God. We don't fear God. So learn from Joseph to fear God, to walk with God. So he was faithful to God, he was faithful to himself, and he was faithful to his master. Faithful not only to God, but to himself and his master. He was a tender-hearted person. He had a forgiving spirit. He was sympathetic. He was strong and wise ruler. And his biography can also be written in 3 words, 3 or 4 words, We are writing biographies with 3 words, isn't it? We have written the biography of Abraham with 3 words, Isaac with 3 words, because he is the last person we can use 4 words, Joseph's biography in 4 words: dreamer, worker, prisoner, ruler. He was a dreamer at the beginning, but later he became a worker, and then a prisoner, and finally a ruler. So that is Joseph. So he was full of the Spirit of God, and he was full of wisdom. We read about Joseph that he was full of the Spirit of God, and he was full of wisdom, and he maintained his good testimony all through his life and career. He had 2 children. I hope you know the names of his children, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh means forget the past, and Ephraim means fruitful, prosper, multiply. We see this in chapter 41, 51 and 52. Genesis chapter 41, 51 and 52 explains the names and meanings of the children of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. Forget the past and be fruitful, prosper and multiply. That is what God tells us also. Don't look into the past, forget the past and be fruitful, prosper and multiply. Now he can be compared to Jesus Christ, He can be compared to Jesus Christ because he was the beloved son. He was a good shepherd. He was severely tempted. These things happened to Jesus also. He was taken to Egypt and he was sold for the price of a slave, and he was exalted after suffering. All these things happened to Jesus Christ also. So get to know more about these 7 personalities. As you travel through Genesis, it is very good that you get to know these personalities, because I've told you that God is interested in transforming lives and making people rather than making history. History and everything is under His control, but we people with our will, must be submitted to Him, and we must be transformed. He is willing if you are willing. So learn more about these personalities and the other personalities of the book of Genesis. Now to conclude about the study of Genesis, I would like to mention 1 or 2 things. One, we can see several types of Jesus Christ in Genesis. Already we have said that the most important topic of the Bible is Jesus Christ, and every page of the Bible reveals Jesus. If so, what are some of the types of Jesus in Genesis? I can mention some of them. First of all, in chapter 3 and 15, we see seed of woman. Seed of woman. God said, I'll put enmity between Satan and the seed of woman. The seed of woman is Jesus Christ, He is the only person who came as the seed of woman, because all other people on earth are seed of man and not seed of woman. It's a type of Jesus. Now, secondly, skins of slain animals that we see in chapter 3 and 21. God made coats of skin and clothed them. For clothing Adam and Eve, skin of an animal was taken, means an animal was slain. Again a picture of, when you sin, the remedy should come by killing an animal and making atonement. God shows that. So skins of animals that we see in chapter 3:21 is another type of Jesus Christ. Then in chapter 4 and 4, we see Abel's blood sacrifice. Abel bringing from his firstlings of his flock, and God respecting that sacrifice. It's again a type of Jesus getting sacrificed. Noah's ark is another type, Chapter 7, 1 and 7 tells us about the ark of safety that was built by Noah. He became a righteous person before God because of God's grace. And God says that I have seen you righteous before me. And Noah went into the ark. Chapter 7 and 7 says Noah went into the ark. So we must also go into the into Jesus Christ. Abide in Him. If you go through the epistles, we see several times in Him, in Him, in Him. So go into the ark. That is the ark of safety. It's a type of Jesus Christ. Then in chapter 22, we see Abraham offering up Isaac as a sacrifice. It's another type of Jesus Christ. And then in chapter 37, 28, 41, chapter 41, 41, etc., we see Joseph being lifted up from the pit and taken to the throne. Again, a type of Jesus Christ, coming out of a pit and going into a throne. So all these are types of Jesus Christ that we can see in the book of Genesis. Also, before we close the study of Genesis, we must learn some place names, Some important place names are very significant in the book of Genesis. Chapter 21, 31 tells about Beersheba. Beersheba. It was a place of a covenant about a well between Abraham and Abimelech. So get to know Beersheba. Chapter 22 and 14 tells about Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh. It's another place. God will provide is the meaning. In the midst of testing of Abraham, God provided a lamb for sacrifice. And God said, Jehovah Jireh. So that's a place name that we have to learn. Then 2462 gives us another name, Ber-lahai-roi. Ber-lahai-roi. Source of life. That is the place where Isaac and Rebekah met together. Church and Christ meeting together, Ber-lahai-roi. 2462. Then 26 and 22 gives us another name, Rehoboth. Rehoboth. Isaac digging another well, and people did not strive to get it, quarrel with Isaac to get it. So that place was named Rehoboth. The Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. God has made us fruitful. That is the meaning. So these places must be noted. Beersheba, Jehovah Jireh, Ber-lahai-roi, Rehoboth, etc. And finally, I urge you to go through 10 names. We must get introduced to 10 names in Genesis and 6 places. The names are God, Adam, Satan, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. If you know these 10 people, then you will get to know the book very well. I'll repeat those names. Number 1 is God. Number 2 is Adam. Number 3 is Satan. The 4th one is Abel. 5th one, Enoch. 6, Noah. 7, Abraham. 8, Isaac. 9, Jacob. And 10, Joseph. So if you get to know these people, you will get to know the book. Then 6 places are also important in the book of Genesis. They are the following: Garden of Eden, Mount Ararat, the Tower of Babel, Ur of the Chaldeans, Canaan, the Promised Land, and Egypt. So to know the book, these places are also important. I hope you got the place names. I'll repeat it again. It all began with Garden of Eden. Then we come to another place, Mount Ararat, then the Tower of Babel, then Ur of the Chaldeans, from where, Abraham was called out, then Canaan, the Promised Land, and Egypt. So these place names and names of these people will familiarize you with Genesis. So this is the book of Genesis. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and God transform you like God transformed several people in the book of Genesis. God bless you. Thank you.